Story title, Running from Her Wedding. She stopped a stranger, not knowing he'd rewrite her fate. Before Lagos wakes, before the Danfos rattle down I Corridor Road, one girl is already walking to the mist. Her name is Amara, 24 years old, the only daughter of a proud mechanic in Surreyr, a man who once believed love could feed a home until debt began to choke it. Sound of footsteps, soft wind. The air is heavy with diesel and early morning dust. Streetlights flicker like restless thoughts, and the city hums under her slippers. In her hand, a torn envelope. Her father's wedding arrangement papers. Inside it, her name, written like a price tag. Her breath trembles. Each inhale tastes of iron and fear. Each step, a prayer she's too tired to say aloud. Music slowly rises. Reflective piano. Amara's eyes are steady, but her heart is not. She walks past a vendor setting up, past a man roasting corn before sunrise. She moves like someone running from her own shadow. Because this morning, she is not walking to work. She is walking away from a decision made without her. Her father owes a debt, one that money can't pay. The man he owes, Mr. Bello, is powerful, respected, and feared. And his demand is simple. Your daughter will marry my son. Then your debt is forgiven. Just like that, a human life turned into currency. But Amara's soul, it's not made for silence. She sketches designs in secret, draws gowns from old dreams. At night, she whispers to herself, I was not born only to please. Still, in her father's house, silence means survival. To argue is to invite a slap, a lecture about loyalty, about gratitude, about how a daughter's duty is to protect her father's honor as she listens. She nods, and she plans quietly. Now, as dawn begins to rise over the city, Amara stops at the bridge near Ojalegba. Cars stream below like silver veins. The air smells of petrol and wet earth. She grips the railing, looks down at the rushing road, and whispers, God, if freedom has a face, show me for a moment. Lagos itself seems to listen. A bird crosses the pale sky. A Danfo honks twice impatiently. Her tears dry before they fall. Then, the sound of an engine behind her, a motorbike halts beside the bridge. The rider removes his helmet slightly, his voice calm, unfamiliar, yet strangely gentle. You look lost. You okay? Amara turns. The morning light hits his face. Only for a second. She blinks, nods quickly, clutching her envelope tighter. The man studies her for a heartbeat longer, then revs the bike and disappears in the traffic mist. She doesn't know it yet, but the stranger she just ignored, the man on that motorbike, will one day change everything. He will be the face of freedom she prayed for. Before now, before debts, before betrayal, before Lagos swallowed her laughter. Amara's life was not always this way. Pause. There was once warmth in this small house. Cracked walls, leaking roof, but laughter that filled every corner. Her mother's laughter. Mama Grace. Mama Grace sold Accra by the roadside. Her hands were always shining with oil burns, but her spirit never tired. She used to hum hymns while flipping the dough, her voice louder than the morning traffic. She'd turn to Amara and say, Don't let the world tell you what you're worth, my girl. You are your own cloth, so at your way. They didn't have much. Sometimes just water and bread for dinner. But there was love, real love, the kind that teaches you how to survive storms. The roof leaked every rainy season. The bed creaked every night. But the house felt like home, until the day's sickness came quietly. Mama Grace coughed for weeks. At first, everyone thought it was just the smoke from the oil. But one night, her cough turned red. Amara was 18. She remembers holding her mother's hand under the dim bulb, the smell of antiseptic mixing with Accra oil. Mama Grace looked at her and whispered, No matter what happens, promise me you won't let them break your voice. A week later, the laughter stopped. The house felt too big for just two people. And her father, the man who once joked with customers, who once danced with Mama Grace in the kitchen, changed. Debt found him. Despair made a home in him. And every night, he sat in silence, staring at the bills spread on the table, muttering numbers like prayers that never reach heaven. He stopped fixing cars for joy. He worked for survival. He spoke less, shouted more. Sometimes he looked at Amara and saw the ghost's wife, and it broke him all over again. Amara learned early that grief doesn't always sound like crying. Sometimes it's the quiet clatter of spoons in an empty kitchen. Sometimes it's the sound of a father locking his heart away. But even in that silence, Amara found her own rhythm. She started stitching old clothes for the neighbors, patching torn jeans, mending school uniforms. Her fingers bled sometimes, but the sound of the needle comforted her. She'd sit by the window after dark, sketching dresses by candlelight, her mind wandering to a life where beauty could pay the bills. Every drawing she made, she folded and hid under her pillow like a secret prayer. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. You are your own cloth, so your way. Gentle humming sound, symbolic return of mother's spirit. Those words became her anthem. Each day, she stitched a little courage into her own story. But courage is quiet. It doesn't roar. It whispers. It survives. And so did she. Music slows. Visuals shift to memory. In her favorite memory, Amara is 12 again. Mama Grace kneels before her, smiling, holding a small, rusted sewing needle. She places it in Amara's palm and says softly, "One day this will open doors." Amara didn't understand then. But now, years later, as the world tries to cage her, that memory burns like a lamp in her chest. The needle still rests in her pocket, a reminder that her freedom isn't something to be given. It's something she must stitch herself. Because sometimes the smallest thing, a bent needle, a mother's whisper, can carry the strength to fight an entire world. It's a rainy evening in Yaba, the kind of rain that smells like old dust and new beginnings. Amara stands alone in the church compound, soaked, shivering, her scarf heavy with water. She holds her sketchbook close to her chest, protecting it like something holy. Behind her, the cracked concrete cross leans forward, as if watching her. The church is nearly empty, only the sound of rain tapping metal roofs, and a man's faint voice humming near the generator room. That man is Michael, 27. Quiet eyes, rough hands, a repairman by trade, an architect by dream. His shirt is stained with oil, his hair damp, his sleeves rolled. He looks up, notices her standing helpless under the leaking roof, and without hesitation walks over, holding an umbrella. "Michael, you'll catch a cold if you stand there." Amara, half smiling, nervous. There's nowhere dry enough to hide. "Michael, then share mine." For a moment, time pauses. They stand close, not touching, not speaking, just breathing under the same small shelter. The rain falling around him like 1,000 whispered prayers. He glances down, notices the sketchbook she's guarding so tightly. "Michael, you draw?" Amara, trying to. "Michael," gentle smile, "then you're already doing more than most." Her lips twitch into the smallest smile. And for the first time in years, she feels seen. Something in his voice, calm, unhurried, touches the place in her heart that forgot what kindness sounded like. She doesn't know who he is or why he cares, but his words settle deep like seeds under wet soil. When the rain finally slows, she thanks him quietly and steps away, walking toward the gate as puddles mirror the church lights. The camera follows her steps, each one softer, lighter than before. A wind gust blows her scarf aside, and her sketchbook slips, a page tearing loose, fluttering to the ground. She doesn't notice. But Michael does. He kneels, picks it up carefully, water dripping down his arm. It's a drawing of a wedding dress. Elegant, simple. Purity stares at it, a faint smile tugging his lips. She disappears down the street. He stands there, rain still falling on his shoulders. Holding the sketch like a seeker, he folds the page gently, slides it into his toolbox, and whispers under his breath, "Whoever she is, she's not ordinary." That's how it began. No love at first sight, just a small act of kindness, a quiet spark under the rain. And sometimes that's all it takes to change the direction of two lives. Love didn't arrive in Amara's life with fireworks or promises. It came quietly, like sunlight sneaking through old curtains. After that rainy evening at the church, she began to notice Michael everywhere. At the market, buying tomatoes from the same woman she did. At the church steps, wiping oil from his hands. Near her mother's old Acrostall, helping a boy fix his bicycle chain. At first, they only exchanged small words, polite smiles, short greetings. But soon, they began to share moments, the kind that don't need many words. He once helped her repair her old sewing machine. It sat stubbornly silent for months, one of the few things her mother had left behind. Michael took it apart with patience, humming softly as he worked. Amara, you fix everything, don't you? Michael, smiling, not everything, just what can still be mended. When the machine finally came to life, Amara laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. It was the kind of laughter that startled even her. Michael just looked at her, quietly, as if the sound itself was worth the effort. After that day, they began to meet more often, sharing bread under the same umbrella, talking about small dreams, a studio for her designs, a home filled with sunlight for him. They didn't speak of love. They didn't need to. It was there, in the pauses, in the way he looked at her sketches like they were sacred, in the way she waited for his knock, without admitting she was waiting. Michael was humble, but his dreams were sharp. He told her he worked as a freelance architect, building spaces that made people feel alive. He believed in quiet purpose. She believed in color and fabric. Together, they began to believe in something new, possibility. But love, even the gentle kind, doesn't go unnoticed. One evening, as Amara adjusted fabric outside her small stall, her neighbor Annie Rose sat beside her, peeling oranges. She watched the glow on Amara's face and smiled sadly. Annie Rose, my child, be careful. Amara, of what, Annie? Annie Rose, of joy that feels too perfect. Gold that shines too bright can burn your hand. Amara smiled politely, but her eyes dropped. She knew what Annie meant. Her father's voice still ruled her nights. Mr. Bellow's debt still chained their home. And Tund, the man she was promised to, still hovered like a storm cloud she couldn't escape. So she hid Michael. She hid her laughter. She hid her hope. That night, she sat by the candle, sketching Michael's face. Every line felt like defiance, like breathing after years underwater. When she finished, she looked at the drawing and whispered, "Maybe God finally heard me." But just then, her father's voice thundered from the next room. "Amara, in 3 weeks you'll be married. I've spoken the word." The candle trembled, the light flickered, and for the first time, Amara felt the wall between love and duty closing again outside. Legos carried on, cars honking, laughter echoing, life moving as if nothing changed. But inside that small room, a dream had begun to shiver. For the first time in years, Amara felt light, like the world was finally opening its doors. She and Michael had a plan. He had found a scholarship interview in Accra, a design fellowship that could change everything. They would leave Lagos quietly, start fresh, chase their dreams together. She packed her sketches, folded her mother's sewing needle into a small pouch, and smiled to herself. Freedom was no longer a prayer. It was a plan. That night, she sat by her bed, staring at Michael's message glowing softly on her phone. "Tomorrow, 7 a.m., we leave before sunrise." She smiled, whispered his name, and tucked the phone under her pillow. But the universe has its own timing. Her father, restless and half-drunk, walked into the room to look for a charger and saw the phone light up again. He picked it up, read the message, and everything broke. His voice thundered through the small house like an explosion. "Amara, who is this Michael?" She froze. Her lips trembled, her heart a storm. "He's a good man, Papa. He just wants to help." "Help?" her father shouted. "You want to disgrace me? After everything I've done?" She tried to explain, but the more she spoke, the louder he grew. All the fear she buried for years came crashing back. The door slammed. Moments later, voices filled the house. Mr. Bellow had arrived, uninvited, with his son, Tund. The air turned heavy at Amara. Bellow's gold chain caught the light as he sneered at her. "So this is your daughter, eh? The one who will marry my son." He looked at Michael, who had just entered, unaware of the storm waiting inside. Ah, and this must be her secret boyfriend. A broke architect trying to steal another man's bride. Michael tried to stay calm. "Sir, I love her. This isn't about money. Please let her choose." But before he could finish, her father's fist hit the table. "If she doesn't marry Tund, I'll lose everything." That sentence hung in the air, louder than any shout. Amara stood there, shaking, realizing the truth. She wasn't her own. She was a payment. Michael's face went pale. He looked at her one last time. Pain, disbelief, love, all in one glance. Then he turned and walked away, and no words. No promises. Just silence. Heavy and final that Amara's knees gave way. She fell to the floor, clutching her mother's needle, as if it could stitch her heart back together. Her father called her name, but she didn't hear him. The world blurred in that small, dim room. Everything spun. The ceiling, the walls, her breath, collapsing into one long, endless ache. When morning came, the sun rose cold and indifferent. A neighbor whispered the news before her even eyes opened. "Your father has fixed the wedding date." Amara lay still, staring at the ceiling. Freedom, once a heartbeat away, now felt like a ghost. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of every door closing around her. The night after her world collapsed, Amara didn't cry. She sat still, staring at the wall, her face calm, too calm. The tears had gone dry. Now, only silence remained, the quiet decision forming beneath it. When morning came, she folded her mother's old wrapper, tied her hair, and went to see Annie Rose. The old woman looked at her face and understood everything. No words needed. Amara spoke softly. "Annie, if I can't escape this marriage, at least let me try to buy my way out." From that day, Amara began to move differently. Every morning, she went to market pretending to buy fabric. But instead, she carried her sketches, carefully wrapped in brown paper, and showed them to a small boutique owner in Yaba 81st. The woman hesitated. But when she saw Amara's drawings, bold, simple, full of life, her eyes softened. "You designed this?" "Yes, Ma." You've got something, my girl." The boutique owner bought her first 3 sketches for a small price. It wasn't much, but to Amara, it felt like air returning to her lungs. Week by week, she sold more designs. Her patterns appeared in the shop window, and customers started asking, "Who made this?" Someone posted a photo online. Then another. Soon her name, Alma Designs, began to circle quietly through Yaba's small fashion scene. She never told her father. Never told anyone. Each night, she hid her earnings in a rusty tin under her bed, right beside her mother's sewing needle. Each night, she whispered, "I'll buy my own freedom." Meanwhile, in another part of Lagos, Michael worked in silence. Heartbroken, he threw himself into his craft, designing homes, sketching bridges, working through the pain. He started a new firm under a different name, trying to bury the past. Fate, however, has a way of circling back. One afternoon, his firm won a design contract for none other than Mr. Bellow's company. Michael didn't know whose name was behind the partnership. He only knew he wanted to build something beautiful, something clean, unlike the world that had broken his heart. Days passed. The city carried both of them forward, 2 souls moving in different directions toward the same fate. Then came the eve of Amara's arranged marriage. The compound was filled with relatives, laughter that didn't reach her heart, and gold wrappers she never asked to wear. Her father sat outside, proud but hollow. Mr. Bellow's people had delivered the bride price. Everything was ready, everything except her heart. That night, Amara sat by the window, her hands trembling. The moonlight touched her sketchbook, open to a drawing of a wedding dress. She stared at it for a long time, then closed it. Slowly, quietly, she packed a small bag, the sketchbook, her mother's wrapper, the sewing needle, and the tin of savings. She stood by her sleeping father's door. For a second, she wanted to whisper goodbye, but instead, she left a folded note on his table. "Papa, I will pay every debt, but I will not pay with my life." Then she stepped out. The streets of Lagos were half asleep, the air thick with the smell of rain and dust. She walked fast, through the mist, through her fear, through everything that had ever tried to hold her down. When she reached the main road, she waved down a Danfo heading toward Victoria Island. The driver slowed, shouted the route, and she climbed in. Her hands shook, but her eyes stayed forward. Halfway through the ride, the bus broke down near a junction. The passengers scattered to find new rides. Amara stood alone under a flickering streetlight, unsure where to go next. A motorbike stopped beside her. Helmeted rider, jacket dusted with sand. The voice came gentle, familiar. "You look lost. You okay?" She turned, trying to see through the helmet's shadow, but she didn't recognize him. She just nodded, desperate for help. "I need to get to the island," she said. "Please." He nodded, shifted his bag, and said quietly, "Hop on. I'll take you." As she climbed onto the bike, her heart raced. Fear, hope, everything in between. The city lights blurred behind them as they rode into the distance. She didn't know it yet, but the stranger carrying her toward freedom was the same man she once lost. And this time, fate had brought him back, not to break her, but to begin again. Morning sunlight cut through the glass walls of Bello Holdings, sharp, golden, merciless. Men in dark suits sat around a long boardroom table, whispering, adjusting ties, pretending not to feel the tension sitting in the air. At the head of the table sat Mr. Bello, proud, polished, untouchable. Today, he was expecting to finalize a contract for his company's biggest urban project, the one meant to erase his debts and raise his name higher than ever. But fate was already waiting at the door. The boardroom doors opened. Two figures walked in. Michael, and beside him, Amara. The whisper started. Eyes turned. Even Mr. Bello froze for a moment before forcing a smile. "Ah, the new project lead. You're early, Mr. Michael. And who is this lady?" Michael placed a folder on the table. Calm, collected. "This," he said quietly, "is the designer whose work inspired our proposal. She has every right to be here." Mr. Bello's smile faded. "You don't bring outsiders into my boardroom." Michael looked up, steady. "Actually, sir, this isn't your boardroom anymore." The room fell silent. He slid a set of documents across the table. Clean, crisp, undeniable. After an internal audit, the investment partners decided to move the project under a new firm. Due to multiple reports of corruption, Bello Holdings is being excluded. The silence cracked like thunder. Mr. Bello's fingers twitched. "What nonsense are you saying?" Michael's tone stayed even. "No nonsense, sir. Just truth." Then he stepped aside, and Amara moved forward. Her steps were slow, deliberate. The same girl who once whispered for freedom now walking into her own dawn. Her voice came soft, but it carried more weight than every man in that room. "My life is not a transaction. My father's debt ends today. I've paid what's mine." She placed a small envelope on the table. The final proof of the repayment she had made anonymously. Her father, sitting quietly near the back, couldn't raise his head. His hands trembled. For the first time, he saw his daughter not as a child, but as a woman standing tall, not in anger, but in truth. Mr. Bello tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His empire, built on fear and debt, was unraveling in front of him, not through shouting or violence, but through quiet courage. The men around the table began to shift uncomfortably, realizing where power truly lived. Michael turned to Amara. Their eyes met. No grand music, no rescue, just understanding. "You fought your own battle," he said softly. "I only drew the lines." A pause. A long, sacred silence. Then, one by one, the men in suit began to stand, acknowledging her strength with small nods, quiet respect. Amara didn't smile. She simply picked up her mother's sewing needle from her pocket, the one she had carried since childhood, and whispered, almost to herself. It finally opened a door. As she walked out, Michael followed beside her, not ahead, not behind, equal. Outside, Lagos roared with traffic and life. The wind brushed against her face. She closed her eyes for a second, breathing in her freedom. Inside the boardroom, Mr. Bello sat in silence, staring at his reflection in glass, seeing, perhaps for the first time, that all his gold couldn't buy peace. And in that quiet victory, Amara didn't need applause. Her dignity was enough. In Lagos, news travels fast. Within days, whispers of the boardroom storm began to ripple through the city, from corporate offices in Victoria Island to the kiosks in Surulere. The name Bello no longer carried the same weight. Contracts were withdrawn. Partners pulled out. Mr. Bello's empire, once shining like gold, began to fade, quietly, painfully, just as it had been built, and tunned. The proud son who once smirked at Amara sat alone in a dim bar on Allen Avenue, an untouched drink before him, anger and confusion mixing in his eyes. He scrolled through his phone. No messages, no friends left to call. The room buzzed with laughter, but none of it reached him. For the first time, he felt what his arrogance had cost him. Not money, but meaning. Far from that noise, in a small corner of Yaba, Amara began again. A narrow shop space, 2 sewing machines, and a wooden sign above the door that read, Grace Threads. Named after her mother, the woman who taught her to stitch hope from nothing. The first day she opened, Annie Rose came with a small bowl of rice and smiled. For blessing, my child, so your hands never go empty. Customers trickled in, 1, then 2, then more. Women who once pitied her now admired her work. Each piece she designed carried a whisper of her journey. Strong lines, soft fabric, quiet power. Michael helped in the background, setting up deliveries, connecting her to clients, fixing the small things she didn't know how to handle. But he never stepped in front of her. He let her shine. Sometimes they worked in silence, side by side. Sometimes they shared laughter, stories, plans. Never rushed, never forced. Just calm, steady companionship. One afternoon, they walked together through Balaga Market. The chaos, the shouting, the bright colors of fabric fluttering like flags of life. No one noticed them. They were just 2 ordinary people moving through the crowd. Amara stopped by a stall, her hands brushing over rolls of lace. She looked around at the noise, the people, the sunlight bouncing off glass, and smiled. Peace feels strange, she said quietly, almost laughing. But good. Michael looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. You earned it. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The market noise, the past, the scars. All that remained was a calm between 2 souls who had seen the worst, and survived it. Amara turned to him, not as a girl seeking rescue, but as a woman who had built her own wings. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't look afraid of tomorrow. The morning came soft, the kind of morning that Lagos rarely offers. A gentle sun, cool breeze, and a hum of vendors setting up along the street. From Annie Rose's small compound, the air smelled of fresh Accra and early hope. Amara stood by the doorway, the sound of sewing machines from her shop drifting faintly in the distance. Today wasn't about work. It was about peace. Annie Rose sat in her plastic chair, fanning herself, smiling that wise smile that always seemed to see more than she said. Amara approached, hand in hand with Michael. He greeted with quiet respect, bowing slightly. Annie Rose studied him for a moment, then nodded. So this is the man who helped you find your strength. Amara smiled softly. He didn't give it to me, Annie. He just reminded me it was mine. The old woman's eyes warmed. Then you both learned something rare. They spent the morning talking about love, work, life, and how silence can sometimes be the loudest victory. There was no celebration, no crowd, no bright decoration. Just 3 people sharing laughter and the soft light of healing. Later, Amara brought out a length of white fabric. Not silk, not lace, just plain cotton, clean and new. She set it on her lap, threaded her needle, the same rusted one her mother once gave her, and began to stitch. Each movement was slow, steady, almost prayerful. Michael watched quietly as words began to form under her hands. Freedom has a face. When she finished, she stood, holding the cloth gently, like something sacred. Together, they carried it to the front of her shop, Grace Threads, and tied it above the door. The wind caught it immediately, lifting it, letting the sunlight pass through. Children ran by, laughing, their voices echoing to the narrow street. Annie Rose smiled from her chair, eyes glistening. Amara looked at the banner as it danced in the wind. She didn't see fabric. She saw every step, every scar, every choice that had led her here. Michael stood beside her, quiet, content. Not possession, not rescue, partnership. For a moment, they just watched the banner flutter, white against the blue Lego sky. The noise of the city faded into something softer, almost musical. And in a low, reflective voice, the narrator speaks, not to them, but to us. Some bonds are chosen, some are born, but the truest are earned by those who refuse to be owned. The wind lifted the cloth higher. The camera lingered on the movement, sunlight glinting through the letters. Then, slowly fade out,